Right. Hey, folks, welcome back. We're here with another edition of Unfinished Business Television. And as you can see, we have a guest this episode. So this is going to be an interview episode. First, let me talk about our guest. Our guest, Brittany Carney, today is a stand-up comedian and writer. I first found out about her through a Vulture article, actually, where she was one of the top comedy up-and-comers of 2022. So I decided to do some research, saw some clips of her stand up on YouTube and other social media. And then when I saw that she was performing in person in New York City, where I live, of course, I had to go out and check this act out. And it was a 1 hour show of Kingdom Phylum Ass. So I was lucky to get the full Brittany Carney experience. I was laughing so hard throughout intentionally. I was in tears. After the show, I have been following her career ever since. I even dragged my co-host Andre Joseph and many friends to some of her shows, and they have all become fans. And she has just released her first comedy special, This Is My Horse, available on YouTube and on album and Spotify or wherever you listen to your music these days. The link will be in our show notes. And she manages to mix intelligence, goofy, awkward history, the personal, and pop culture in her act. The amazing, intelligent, beautiful, hilarious stand-up comedian extraordinaire, Miss Brittany Carney.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's such a, I'm so honored by that intro. I appreciate your support and thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. We have been trying to get you on this show for a while, actually.
Yeah.
But you know, busy
work.
Exactly, busy schedules. Thank you for being here. Would you rather us call you Brittany or Miss Carney? Which would you rather?
I like Brittany.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
You know, don't want to be too formal. You know.
Right.
First question, where are you originally from?
Sure. So I was born and I spent my childhood in Tokyo, Japan. And then when I was like a teenager, we moved to Philadelphia, which is where my dad's from. And when I was a kid in Japan, we visited Philadelphia basically every summer since I was a baby. And my parents live there now. So I don't know. Sometimes to answer your question, sometimes if I don't feel like like if I'm have to make small talk with somebody that I meet quickly, I'll just say Philly because it's easier. I don't have to go in this whole.
Okay.
It's more complicated to explain why, like the Japan part. But Japan, I feel, is probably ultimately my home.
Okay. Andre?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Is that?
No. I was just sending him that he could ask his question. Sorry about that.
Cool.
Yeah. Again, thank you for coming on today, Brittany. So what was your earliest influence in getting into comedy?
Totally. The earliest that I can remember is okay, I got really into there is an old British comedy series called Blackadder, which was on like the BBC, I guess in the 80s, right? And I found out about this because Tokyo American Club, which is kind of like a community center or whatever for a lot of expat families or whomever is buys membership, basically, is like, yeah, basically think about some kind of like what's the word I'm thinking of? A community center. Uh anyway, the point is that this place had a video rental like section, and I had a junior membership card. So then I discovered Blackadder because I recognized Rowan Atkinson from Mr. Bean, and then I really got into the series. And this was when I was in the 8th grade. And it's not like my parents introduced me to this. So to this day, my mom is like, we don't really know what drew you to that, but we remember that like it's so funny that you just kind of stumbled into this world of like 70s, 80s BBC comedy. So that led me into Monty Python. And yeah, I don't know. I got really excited about John Cleese and Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie and all these white guys from that were like in their prime, in the mid 80s. And then so I wouldn't say that I particularly grew up on stand up, but personally have a theater background. So when I started watching local stand up and initially getting interested in trying it out or doing an open mic, I didn't feel like there was a stand up specifically that I was inspired by, but rather I was really interested in different kinds of humor presented. Yeah, I feel like maybe Blackadder is my biggest influence early on.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
did you ever watch The Young Ones by any chance? Speaking
The
of
young
mid
ones?
80s.
No.
Oh, that is a personal favorite. That came out, I believe, on MTV in the mid 80s. They were more like punk comedy though.
Cool. Okay. It was like a sketch show.
It was supposed to be a sitcom, but then they'd have like moments in certain episodes where there'd be like, let's say, talking animals that were rodents running around their apartment. So it wasn't like structured, strict structure. But
I see.
what was interesting about it though was episodes where a character could die in one episode, and then next week they'd be right back, and there would be no questions asked as to like, hey, what happened I thought you were dead. I guess
Oh,
sort of like South
interesting.
Park.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I see, I see. Cool. That's funny because actually, like, because I was that's from the 80s, you said. There's still a lot
Hmm.
of series from the 90s that were on MTV or even like I guess like Nick at Night or Adult Swim. No, I was into Adult Swim later. My point is it's mostly MTV. I like missed that basically because
Oh.
stuff that even might be like older, like stuff that was probably for older audiences, but kids that were in the 90s watched anyway. I didn't always have access to because I was in Japan. But that said, certain things like when we came to the US to visit Philadelphia or Annapolis, I would see some shows on MTV with my cousins, but I feel like there's this whole generation of either MTV comedy or like earlier reality series or sketch series that I feel like are in the canon that I need to catch up to.
Oh, okay.
So
Understandable
I'll
though.
check out Young Ones.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I mean, you've performed all over New York City and across the country. Is there any particular venue that you feels like your favorite to ever perform at?
Oh yeah, great question. I love so I feel like, New York, of course, like many cities has like different worlds of comedy. I say like venues that are more, alternative versus straightforward clubs. And I like performing in both. It's really important to me to do a balance of clubs for mostly Manhattan and Union Hall and Bell House. I love so much. Um, I think maybe Bell House is Bell House is a favorite because of its scope and size. And I have this like ex- kind of when was this? This must have been 2015. So I wasn't even living in New York yet, but there was a podcast that I liked called Another Round by it was like two black women, and they had a Kwanzaa spectacular show. So my sister and I were fans of the podcast, and we went. Neither of us were living in New York, but we like went to New York to go see the show at the Bell House. And I remember the feeling in there, and that it was such a big venue, and that wow, it felt like kind of far away or something. Like I would never perform on this kind of thing. It truly felt like I was coming to watch this big spectacle. And then now I perform in the Bell House fairly frequently, which feels really surreal because once upon a time it was just something that like, it's like coming to see, yeah, something that felt out of reach. Anyway, now, yeah, I was there Monday. That's a favorite of mine. Union Hall, I love so much, and I feel really comfortable there. I'd say the Comedy Cellar is really exciting and a magical place to perform because it feels so old school and you never know who you get to watch or who's sharing a lineup with you. And yeah, those are my three favorites.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both Union Hall Bells we've been to, and they're just great for comedy.
Right. I love them so much. And I love like Union Hall is so fun because it's like cave like, and I think
Mhm.
it's ideal for comedy, like low ceiling, which is why among the Comedy Cellar venues, because there's like four that are clustered together, my favorite is the oldest one, which is on McDougal Street, and that's like the uh, kind of like older school one, and it's tighter, it's more intimate, and there's a low ceiling. It's my favorite versus the bigger, showier Village Underground. But the Bell House, it's just really incredible performing at the Bell House because you like it's so much energy coming from the room, especially when it's packed. Like I recently opened for Kid Fury there, who's like a
Oh,
podcaster, right? And it was like it's interesting because like he's not necessarily a stand-up, but is now doing essentially like a stand-up storytelling tour. And so, anyways, I was like booked to open for him, and he really packed it out. So performing in that kind of space where it's like I don't know, it was like 3 million. I mean, I don't know what the capacity actually, maybe 300, like 300 to 300, like screaming hip black people. It was just the coolest, loudest energy. So, yeah, I love the bell.
Um, Now, how many years have you been doing professional stand-up comedy?
Yeah, sure. Um, I think I can say right now it's 2024. So I left okay, I would say like 3 years. I'm saying that because I was doing stand-ups basically nightly, but I was still working at a private school here in Brooklyn, and I was like essentially set to come back to teach in the fall of 2021. And I remembered through the summer I was feeling depressed because I was considered for a research and a writing job on the Daily Show, and I went through a lot, and I like went through several cycles of consideration, but I just ultimately didn't get it. And I remember feeling really down because I just felt like, okay, well, I guess yeah, I'll go back to teaching, which obviously I was grateful for, and I loved the kids, but I was like trying to make it. I was trying to work and support myself through comedy, right? So then, anyway, so then, actually, truly at the last minute, like I taught a day of assistant teaching kindergarten in September. That night, I got a call. Um, yeah, your staff done that down Michael Che. So I got so like over the weekend I had to quit my teaching job. And so what that meant is that because I quit my teaching job, of course, the writer's room, which was about 2 months, of course, that didn't mean a guaranteed like everything will also be set for the year, or that now you're going to be a full-time touring stand-up. It meant that it like set into motion the steps that I needed. So basically, I quit my job. I started going on the road way more regularly. I got connected with agents because I like a touring agent because of that job specifically, and I had a really supportive manager. And so, essentially, since late 2021. And I've had to pick up odd jobs since, like, for example, last year I was for the past years I've been doing like freelance oral history work that's related to what I went to graduate school for. But I've been able to, in most chunks of the year, support myself by going on the road or picking up more like larger gigs or shorter writer rooms.
Okay. And that's good. And you're supporting yourself with your passion or what you love.
Yeah, and this year I hit my 10-year stand-up anniversary. So I've been doing it for 10 years, but most of it, especially in DC and while I first moved to New York, was like I always was working in like I had museum jobs by day. So that's how I initially moved myself to New York because I got a job at the New York Historical Society for a Jim Crow exhibition. So anyway, so yeah, and I was doing comedy at night when I was doing
Um, uh, well, this is just a random question, but did many of your coworkers or people who knew you from those jobs come and see your show?
Oh, that's a good question. When I first started doing open mics in DC and moving a little bit forward in comedy, a lot of friends from I had at that point graduated my master's, but friends from my master's program came. Like I was dragging them already to go watch local comedy, and then once I decided to try it, definitely friends were supportive and came. Then everybody talks about this that there's like a way, there's like a what happens is like there's like cycles of at first your coworkers and your friends want to come see you, and then it kind of dips out the more because they come and you're doing the same jokes or whatever. It's like late or it's a lot to sit through, right? Like a local comedy show, but uh in a smaller scene like you see, especially at the time because it's like 10 years ago. So my point is that then I was working primarily at a a Civil War museum that had it was like pretty close-knit staff. And I also around that time, so that was like for 5 years. And then I was working at a Smithsonian American History Museum. And yes, friends from both jobs came to see me. And it would be like, and then actually, that said, so then, yes, friends from museum jobs in DC came to watch. I would say since moving to New York, like no coworkers that I've had come, because it's like the other thing is that I haven't really centered, like for example, I went the longest term job I've had in New York that's not comedy related is working at the school. So I don't know, teachers are busy, they're tired, like they kind of are curious or expressed interest, but I don't think really anybody's come, except once somebody came to Kingdom Final Mass after I had left the school. But then also and then when I was working at the New York Historical Society, my coworkers for this Jim Crow exhibition, we were doing this like living history stuff. They were all actors. I think essentially it was like a small group of basically actors who picked up this work acting out as people that were living in New York, Jim Crow New York, you know, doing different jobs. There's like, we weren't close enough. And I also think that they had no interest in like, let's go see stand-up comedy, you know, while they're already like struggling working actors in New York City. So anyway, yeah. But I would say more so in DC.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm sure they're now like watching you on YouTube, like, hey, I used to work with her.
That's exactly what's happening. So many people like that are coming out of the woodwork, and like, you know, people from my high school or earlier jobs too. And they're actually so supportive. It's really sweet. Friends from graduate school, friends from different jobs I had while I was more focused on that over comedy, and comedy, while comedy was still sort of a hobby. People from that have really shown a lot of curiosity and support online recently. So that's great.
That's awesome.
So when it comes to doing your shows, do you have a particular process for writing your material, like any kind of rituals you normally do?
Okay. I feel constantly like I should have a more structured approach, but honestly, this is how I operate. I always have a notebook on me. And the idea is that because of the nature of doing stand-up at night and then like usually having time to kill, the idea is that I always have a notebook on me so that if I'm like on the train or sitting in a coffee shop or like having a glass of wine at a bar before a show, I can pull out the notebook and like write things out that are in my mind. And if something strikes me while I'm out and about, I can write at least like a bullet point and then come back to it later. And definitely I'm somebody that needs to write out a bit. Like I kind of look like, you know, in The Shining, when he, what's it called? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. It's like a line that's repeated over and over again.
Yeah.
So when I'm figuring out the language or the beats of a joke, I like write it over multiple times. I think it helps me memorize it. And also if something needs to be tweaked, that's my system. And yeah, I think especially when I'm first figuring out a joke, I write it out frequently and I'll come back to a notebook. So it really looks unhinged. It's like, you know, it's like repeated idea. I would say something that I think I need to work on actually is once I've got the bit out or it's been working on stage, sometimes I like stop writing it out. Like I'll edit it in my head or something. And I just kind of, but I think it would actually serve me if I then kind of like broke it down. And you know, so I have some friends that are comics that have a big whiteboard or like post-it notes or an Excel. Sometimes I feel maybe that would really help me out. But on the other hand, it doesn't come naturally to me. So really, what's the point? I don't know. So my main system is the timing is loose. I don't like wake up and write for an hour, but I always have a notebook on me.
Okay, that's good. Well, like one of the things I've noticed in various shows I've seen you do, you seem to, is it a natural nervous energy that you have, or is it, you know, just kind of like a persona, or do you like tap into certain parts of yourself for like when you're on stage?
People ask me this. I feel like I just don't know. I think what happens is like, I think to be honest with you, I think it's the last. It taps into a part of me that I guess maybe I don't know. I remember early on, like a year in of doing stand up in DC, somebody was like, "Is that an act?" And I was like, "I don't know. No, not really. I mean, I'm too new at this to have to have a character. You know what I mean? Anyway." And then uh also one time early on, somebody that came up after me was like, "You have to be on acid to understand Brittany," which made me feel like 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 okay, that's like maybe one third that's flattering, two thirds like, well, okay, thank you so much. I'm gonna go reorient my every goal, every creative aspiration I've had. But the point is that in terms of that stuff, like nervous energy, I don't know. I think it's like a part of me, and sometimes it really feels fun to play with that on stage. But I don't particularly feel nervous. Maybe it's unless it's obviously a higher stakes gig, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think I like playing with frenetic energy. It feels like it comes from a natural place. But then when I'm performing, I can also kind of use it as a tool to like slow down or speed up or hold tension, and it helps my own comedic timing. And I swear that stuff I learned through by accident or through failure. So I guess that's how I feel.
Okay, because I've noticed you're like when you're on stage, sometimes you're not afraid to let something hang there before you move on to the next thing, or I guess the punchline. And that's the
Yeah.
thing that is amazing because usually comedians are like so I guess so quick-witted or have to want to move through their act, and you're just seem like you're not afraid to like, okay, I'm just going to take my time, you'll wait.
Sometimes
And I admire that.
oh, thank you. Thank you. I have fun in that. And sometimes comics tell me, "Oh, you're not afraid of silence," which is funny because that also can come off as a backhanded compliment. But they're just talking about like uh pausing or whatever. And maybe it's like I think maybe too, you know, if I have started a joke and I feel like the audience isn't with me or my timing is off, and um like the laughs in the setup isn't as strong as I wanted, I think I've like if I pause, it resets everything. And there's natural humor in like awkward silence, like I think. So it actually helps me feel like I'm a what's that called? A conductor? Like you know what I mean? Like a conductor of my own time and energy and space. Yeah. So that's kind of what's played out maybe by and my cat is bothering me to the side, so don't mind if you see a tail.
No, no, we
No,
love
no problem.
Yeah.
all those gorgeous creatures should be
Yeah.
on. um, has there ever been, and this might be something of a touchy subject, but has there ever been a moment where you actually bombed on stage that you remember?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's a touchy subject. I think it's like a very relatable and funny subject. Of course, I understand why it could be touchy because it's painful to bomb, but
Yeah.
it's just a part of it and it always will be. And in fact, I remember the first real bomb because the truth is my first like handful of shows that I did when I was really early on were like friends from graduate school came, so they were really supportive, or like the first open mics I did were like kind of cushier. Like they were like supportive open mics where there was an audience. And I remember, and that's not, by the way, in New York City, open mics are really rough. Like it's like just comics who are not really listening and waiting to go up. So nobody's really laughing, which is why this is an aside. It's really impressive to me when I talk to comics who have really made it by starting in New York City because it's just a more brutal beginning. In
Mhm.
a city like DC, you when you're first doing mics, it's a bit more supportive generally, and you build confidence that way. However, I remember the first time that it was in this bar called Handsome Cock, and it was like a small, like dingy bar, and I felt like it was like a front for something, you know. But anyway, somebody ran a weekly open mic on Thursdays there, and it was like not a popular bar necessarily, so it wasn't like there was exactly a crowd, and it was just comics and like three random people from the street that were in there. And I just remember the experience of crickets, like you know what I mean, like silence. Like something I said meant silence, silence. And I remember feeling like, oh, this is a proper bomb. But also I was so new to comedy that doesn't even count, because the truth is you're bad anyway when you're new. I would say now, of course, I've gone through, like, over the past 3 years, I remember I'm trying to think of like real bombing experiences. By real, I mean like, because I'm now more experienced, it means something when I bomb, and it definitely means something when everybody else on the show is doing well and you don't have a good set. But it's also kind of funny. Let me think. Let me think of like a painful experience. Oh my God. Well, one time, this was at New York Comedy Club, and it must have been like last year. It was around the holidays, so what was happening was, well, the NYU, the sorry, the West Village, the East Village location of New York Comedy Club in general has a lot of students or people that are like going to NYU, but this was a particularly collegey audience because it was during the holiday break. So a lot of college kids were back in New York or something, and like the audience was pretty young, and it wasn't like a particularly stand-up seasoned audience, and they just thought I must have done a terrible job connecting. They must have thought I was an alien, like the way that they were staring at me, and I was really sweating up there. And so much so that and it's kind of funny to mom, once you get more comfortable with it, you like learn how to make fun of yourself, you learn how to address what's going on, which I was trying. I was like pulling out all my little tricks, but then I was so awkward that I guess as I was like, okay, bye, I'm serious, like they kind of went like this and like made faces like, oh my God, that was so weird at me, and like slow, uncomfortably cocked like that. So I don't really remember the set so much as I remember the experience of getting off stage. I remember also, let's see, um, oh man, I had a one time at the Comedy Cellar, somebody, I was like somebody interrupted me about something, and then I was like trying to ingratiate myself by doing light crowd work. So I said to this guy, oh, well, okay, well, how's your night going? And then he said, worse now. And then I know, and he got kicked out because they're very strict about heckles. But the point is that I was having an awkward time. So anyway, also the truth is that bombing happens. Also, the real reality about bombing is that the more you do it stand up, it becomes less about whether the entire set felt like a bomb, and you become more concerned afterwards with what worked and what didn't. So I think I would remember earlier on full sets that were bombing, or like that whole thing sucked. Now it's like, oh, I had a really, oh, here's my friend. Okay, so she's like, her energy is like, I think she perceives something like a spirit in the background. So anyway, I think I what's the worst set that I had recently? And it's kind of funny to think about actually. But anyway, my point is that now you're like, oh, it started weird, or that joke didn't land, or why did I have them initially and then I lost them? Like, oh, that joke bombed as opposed to I bombed the entire time. But anyway, yes, I've bombed and I'll bomb more, I'm sure. But it's how you grow. Or it's not how you grow. Positive. Yeah, positive twist. Sometimes I'm somebody. My last point about this is like, I don't think it's good sportsmanship as a comic to blame the audience or whatever. But sometimes it is really tough. Like if the audience doesn't have their chemistry, or if somebody before you, oh my God, I was gonna say if somebody before you had like an awkward set, it can be hard to then like kind of wrangle the audience back, or sometimes spatially the room is really bizarre, like bad acoustics. But I had this clear memory actually. There's a comedian, Andrew Schultz, who's like extremely popular, and he's like kind of in the Rogan crowd. And it was just a regular lineup at New York Comedy Club, and he was on it. He was on the lineup and billed on the lineup, which meant that of course most of the audience was there for him. And he's like a big energy, and like has like a really specific tone to his comedy. So normally on a lineup like this, where somebody more famous is on the lineup, they would close it out. But I don't know, he's busy, he's working, he had to go somewhere else, so he was like in the middle of the lineup. And of all people, I had to follow him, and it was brutal. Like,
Oh man.
what? It's like, yeah, here's our guy, and I'm like, who's this like freak? Like and I really struggled. They were really confused by me, but I'm proud of myself. I did ultimately figure it out. There was like a lot of bros that were really like, okay, that's the end of the show. Like that, Andrew Schultz was the end of the show, and now we have to like listen through this woman. But that's okay. I kind of figured it out. So that's a recent memory.
Okay. Okay, this is probably kind of a strange question, only because you also, you've been in writers' rooms and you do your own stand-up. But my question is, when you're like writing specifically for a show,
Okay.
versus your own stand-up, your normal type of humor that you use, do you ever sometimes find yourself writing for the show and you're like, wait, that's more my type of humor, and like have
Yeah.
to cross it out or save it for later,
Yeah.
and then have to like, I guess, sanitize it for the material for the show?
Yes, it's like you have to learn how to be. It's like, yeah. So what I'm learning as I'm like learning more about how, and each writer's room is different, obviously, because in my experiences, I've done two that were animation, one that was like sketch, and one that was like I was punching up a scripted podcast. But in each of these
Oh.
experiences, what's tough is that you realize, because each show is somebody's baby, right? Like somebody's creation, and then these people are hired to then like help build it out. But you still have to really align yourself with like the baby, or like the owner of that, like the mother, you know what I mean? Whether it's Michael Che or whomever. And so it's kind of like, it reminds me of, I don't know, when you see videos of animals online, and it's like, this pig thinks it's a dog, or like whatever, or like a dog, like a puppy that grows up around like horses or something. You know what I mean? You kind of
Yeah.
have to make yourself that other species. And I feel like I've learned that like the hard way, but I feel like misunderstood in a writer's room where I'm also pretty shy. So I have a harder time like speaking out a lot in the moment. I feel like I'm processing internally, right? But then, so then when you're like, then when you go to write out your script, I don't know. I definitely feel like, oh, I have to shave off parts of Brittany, because this isn't really like the pig pen. It's like I'm the cat that's like randomly at the barn or something. But everybody is their own cat. Everybody has to learn how to work under the like creative vision of the showrunner. But on my most recent writer's room experience, I actually found it was particularly challenging. I felt like it was a more intimate writer's room, which meant that there was more emphasis on everybody's specific individual sense of humor, which is good. But then also, I was like, I would suggest something or pitch something, and I think it just like didn't come across, like they didn't like see me, and that was hard. But yeah, I guess it's navigating that balance.
Yeah, speaking of balance too, because we are in a very sensitive climate, especially when it comes to comedy. Do you always feel like when you're doing your bits that you have to like walk that fine line between what's funny and what might be too offensive to people?
Sure. Yeah, and I think that depends on who the audience is and what the kind of like the tone, like yeah, it depends on the audience, and it depends on what the vibe of the culture of the show is. Like for example, I was talking with the comedian Dan Perlman, he created like that show Flatbush Misdemeanors, which is on Showtime. And so we were talking specifically about what it's like to, like, if you were at a club, like it's any given night, or let's say most of the week you were performing at clubs in Manhattan, which is kind of like you have to be a bit faster, it's a bit harsher, they're less maybe sensitive about certain topics, maybe. And then you like go to Union Hall. There's like even an energy that's like a club energy, that if even as a kind of a crossover comedian, if you come into Union Hall with too much of a club energy, it actually, you can feel it. You can feel like the audience pulling away as if you're being aggressive, which is funny because I'm not that person. Like I'm this like elf, you know what I mean? Like I don't think I'm particularly like offensive or like abrasive, but I feel like it when I feel that shift in comedy venue, and that's okay. That's like something fun to figure out or play with. I think if I'm talking about race, which like if I'm being playful about race or whatever, or um I have that joke about I uh sound awkward saying the N-word. So I've had so many different kinds of responses to this. It generally works well because I know myself and I can read the audience. And I could say that kind of joke does well in Manhattan versus and Brooklyn. But there's different kinds of audiences who have pulled away from it. For example, like occasionally a Brooklyn audience might be sensitive about that, especially if it's a mostly white audience. They just don't know whether or not they can laugh at that. But that is a different kind of tension from when I did it in where was I? Albany. I did it in a Albany Funny Bone. I think it was Albany. Yeah, it was Albany Funny Bone, which is like, a comedy club next to a hotel in the suburbs of Albany. That audience was white and like knows people who say they know people who white people who say the N-word, right? So they really stared at me. That joke met silence because it wasn't even like a Brooklyn hipster audience that's like, oh, oops, like we're so liberal, we don't know if we can say it. They were just like, we don't know, girl, like what you want from us. Like that was the energy. And then, for example, like, and then when I've done that in Boston for different reasons, it was like a bit tougher. But that joke always, but then went over really well in the South, even among like liberal audiences in the South. The South is such a fun audience space for when you want to make jokes about race, because the truth is they live every day like the story of American race relations, because just by nature of growing up and being around like cultural like the things that shape the South culturally. So anyway, yeah, that what else? I have a joke right now where I'm like ironically saying that's pretty gay because I'm talking about something. I'm talking about like Julius Caesar. So I'll say, yeah, and that joke kind of similarly, and also because I'm not like a cis gay man, the way that audiences respond to that shifts. Like if they get that I'm being ironic, then that's the most ideal, and it tends to work best if there are gay individuals in the audience who like respond to me warmly about it. But sometimes I think when people tighten up about that line, for example, it's because it's like a really straight audience and they're like, we don't know if we can laugh at that, and we don't know if you can laugh at that, which is fair. So it's about finding the right tone.
Yeah, I mean, you tend to say like what we're all thinking, like black hobbits. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I really don't know.
Yeah, but sometimes people get tight about that, but not black people. It's never
Yeah,
black people. It's like white people who don't know whether I'm joking or not. Or they like if I bring up black hobbits, they're like, yeah, like they don't know, they don't really get that I'm being kind of cynical about it. And it's a bit frustrating. I have to find the right, it's like when I do that, I have to find the right tone to tell people that I'm like joking about this. It's okay to laugh at black hobbits, and sometimes people do, but I recently did it, for example, at West Side Comedy Club, which I really love, and the audiences can be diverse, but it also tends to be kind of like it swings older and it swings white, the audiences, because it's on the Upper West Side. So I did it sometimes I do that joke there and they kind of stare at me like, good, representation matters. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
no,
No,
if you have more, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. And since obviously as a stand-up, you have to write for yourself, but you're also writing for these other shows. I'm just wondering, do you have like, is one more exciting, or is they each have like, I guess you have a passion for each?
like writing versus doing my own stand-up.
Yes.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, writing for a writer's room is exciting because it pays you. It helps me,
Obviously.
to be honest. I think that's an interesting question, and I don't. Hmm, I think because stand up is like so individualized, and when I come up with a new joke that works for me, it's exciting. It can also feel like a chore sometimes because it's like I have to perform every night and I have to like, so it can feel like work, but then it can also feel like the most electric discovery, and it kind of depends on the night or show on given night. I think because this is such an interesting question, because I think that because my career as a writer is relatively newer. Like I've been in a handful of writers' rooms, and I'd love to continue to grow at that. It's really exciting to be in a writer's room, and it's really exciting to then have to figure out what's my role in a certain writer's room. And and I would love to continue that in a substantial way. And as I learn about and grow in like as I like take on more writing, which I hope will be the case, I don't want to lose my excitement for stand up. That happens to a lot of comedians naturally because working as a writer gives you stability and the paycheck. There are now many stand-ups who then kind of like take a back seat from stand-up. They're like less interested in it because stand-up's very hard and it's very stressful and you have to like run around all the time. You have to go on the road. I don't want to lose that excitement. I want to find a way that I can work as a writer and find a lot of energy in that, but also not lose sense of myself and lose sense of myself as a stand-up and not lose sense of that drive. Yeah, I guess those are different ideas that are swirling in my head in response to your question.
Yeah, so for the time that you've been doing stand-up, do you have any comedy mentors, or what's the best advice you ever got as you started?
Oh, this is amazing. I have a lot of comedy. I would say that maybe initially, like the foundation is that all the people that my little group of guys that I started with in DC, we were like each other's mentors, and there are people that I looked up to in that scene. And I remember early on when comedy is stand-up in particular, like straightforward stand-up is such a male-dominated space, right? And so when I started, there weren't many women in the DC comedy scene. The few that were around were like older and were about to move off, to New York or LA or work as an actor or something. And this one woman who's now a journalist, she said to me, or she was a journalist at the time, but she was doing open mics at night. She now works full-time as a journalist. She doesn't do comedy anymore. But I remember forever what she told me, which is that don't let anyone into your comedy head. And I remember that sentence because like it's really served me. Because the thing is, like, I'll run a joke by a friend or a comic and they'll be like, they won't get it, and then it's discouraging, or like they'll be like, well, I don't know, and that just happens. And that's why I always believe the best way to test out material is the only way, which is do it in front of an audience. So I've learned to trust myself from that like line, and that was so many years ago. But I remember it on a certain, like, the only people that you should let into your comedy head is the audience, because they'll tell you whether or not something is funny. That's like that's the bottom line. More recently, in terms of mentorship, I think of Gary Goldman as a mentor because I opened for him on the road. He's been supportive to me since I got into the Comedy Cellar and began asking me to open for him here and there. And I really look up to how he does comedy. I really like how he operates creatively. Let's see, another kind of, I would say that he is one informal comedy mentor.
And another question I have for you is, obviously, the word of mouth is how I found out about you from Jeff. But of course, you're all over social media, and that's helping to build your audience. Do you see the benefits of social media for this particular time, especially coming out of the pandemic, to build your audience and build your fan base?
So this topic kind of makes me want to cry, because not because of like, but it's important. That's sort of the point. So yes. So here's the thing with social media. It's like, so it actually now drives everything in terms of success in comedy. And I think that I'm terrible at it. I like post a bunch, but I'm not very organized about it. And I've been explicitly told by representation, you got to like post more reels. And that's also, frankly, how people sell tickets. And some people are extremely like business minded about it. Like many comics hire, a social media person to edit their reels. I don't have that. For the moment, I'm just doing my own, except for like my special, which got chopped up by the production company, and they were airing some of those clips. But anyway, so yeah, during pandemic, I guess the pandemic saw the big spike in like obviously TikTok, or like reels comedy, or like front-facing videos or sketches, even on Instagram and also on YouTube. I was having fun making like really silly videos that were like not stand-up, but I was just kind of like futzing around in my parents' backyard during the pandemic. And then now that reels post-pandemic have really taken off, and like crowd work clips. I really felt left behind through many cycles of this, to be honest, where it's like I felt like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, it's not really what I love about performing comedy. Like, I want to save my stuff for the stage. I don't want to have to like waste jokes online if I want to save them for something that I want to film or for a big live show. But then I just learned it like totally kicked my ass. Just like the industry, like so, like I learned seriously the hard way that I have no choice but to really feed into the social media machine. And I mean, like gigs that I was booked for, like on the road, got canceled because nobody bought tickets, or I had two shows and they got consolidated into one because nobody knows whether I live or die. But then, or like you know, learning how much it takes to promote a show that I'm doing locally here in New York. It is so much about social media promotion. So I had to kind of get out of my own ass and figure it out in my own way. And I would say that I'm still figuring it out, but I'm in a place where I think I'm having fun actually, even if a certain video doesn't meet many numbers. The truth is that I'm only posting stuff that I do actually find funny. So if right now if right now someone who seemed interested in my comedy came to my Instagram and they looked at my reels, what's important to me is like, oh, who is this girl? Why don't I know her? Her stuff is so funny. Like, if I have nothing else, that's what's, you know, I can have that to my advantage. And so I don't know, I'm going to be having, that's my big project this year, is really growing in social media.
Trust me, we can identify. It's the same
Yeah.
with this show. We keep trying to do anything to get
Yeah.
more viewers, get,
Yeah.
you know, get more promotions, get interviews, you know.
Yeah.
We have one particular guy, Larry V. Scott, who will look at our videos, but he still won't engage, even though we keep begging him to be on the show.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. And people, exactly, there's like, and there's so much, right? And I guess it's like engaging is also commitment. Like, it's also a job. So it's, I don't know, it's really tough, but important, I guess. Godspeed.
Well, yeah, because that is kind of how, you know, I discovered your stand-up was, you know, I saw the article. I was like, okay, I've never heard of her or any of her comedy. Went to your social media, and it was like how you said, like, yeah, why haven't I heard of her? You know, like she's hilarious.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, thanks. I didn't mean to sigh so dramatically just now. I really am so grateful for you. Thank you. In fact, I like that really that means so much to me because I feel like that's my main mode of operation these days. For example, like okay, so well, the day that my special, okay, I have like two little stories. So one is that last August or early September, I filmed my special in mid-September. So at the end of the summer, I was booked at West Side Comedy Club to run my like set, basically, like to headline a show. But under 8 people had bought tickets, like 8 people had bought tickets, and then like one person actually meant to buy tickets for the later show, which is really funny that I got that call that day. It was like somebody's actually meant for the 10 p.m. So the club was like, how do you feel? Should we cancel it? And actually, yeah, we just like canceled my show, and I was really sad about it, you know, because I meant that I couldn't get anybody up there to like help me run my set. So it's okay. The club offered me a spot on the second show, just, you know, like, well, do you want to do this other show? And sure enough, and that show was headlined by Al Franken, the Mississippi senator, Minnesota senator, who, you know, obviously is now kind of like revisiting live comedy. And so it was so funny to be like overshadowed by Al Franken, of course, but then also I did a set on it and I had a good set. And then after my set, a couple came over and the guy was like, wow, we really loved you. We hope that you become rich and famous. But the true irony is that I couldn't get, like, I like did a good job on the show. People were excited about my set, but I couldn't get anybody to come to my show, which was earlier than and I didn't say that. I was almost like, well, cool, thank you, because like no one came to mind, you know. But then more recently, the day that my special dropped, I was in a coffee shop in my neighborhood, and I was like really stressed about like logistics related to the special dropping, and I was like kind of disassociating, and this girl came up to me and was like, "Oh, are you Brittany Carney?" She said, "I hope you become rich and famous." And I don't need to be rich or famous, but I would love to continue working, supporting myself by getting my comedy out there. So I keep being told that I'm underrated. Is that the right language? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'd love to be just accurately rated. You know what I mean? But I think that's on me, and I feel pretty optimistic about like pushing my content out there over the next few months, especially following the special. So thank you for finding me. That really makes a big difference.
Yeah, no, from what I've seen, you've gone very far, and I think you're going to go even further. That's a guarantee.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. We'll see.
So, we are a movie review show, and one of the things we actually want to ask you was, do you have a favorite movie or even a favorite comedic actor?
That's a that's a fun two questions. My favorite movie is Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yes.
It's so
Wow.
good. It's kind of random, but I remember watching it as a kid and obviously not really getting all, and then I watched it older. Maybe I watched it actually around the time, like I watched it again, like when around the time I was getting into like Monty Python. And I was just kind of like, again, I had this like membership card to this VHS rental. So I love, I remember getting more of it then and being kind of impressed by technically like the combination of live action and animation. And to this day, it's just like my favorite. It's so funny and zany. And I have a lot of like, I personally have a lot of like, kind of like Disneyland nostalgia, whatever, because I grew up in Tokyo. You can go to Tokyo Disneyland pretty easily because it's like you can take the train there in 40 minutes. So we went there a lot as a family. So in Tokyo Disneyland, there's Toontown, which obviously is like, or in Disneyland in general, there's Toontown, I guess. So
Yeah.
Toontown, like, obviously is centered in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I love it. I love Jessica Rabbit. I love Hot Bob Hoskins, who plays Eddie
Yeah, he
Valiant.
was great.
Yeah.
In terms of, so that's my favorite movie, I think. Otherwise, my favorite movie might be like Holy Grail. I think it's one of my favorite movie. My favorite Monty Python. Well, that said, actually, like there's one Monty Python film call, it's one of their like lesser known ones, but it's And Now for Something Completely Different. Actually, that might be my favorite over Holy Grail. It's just like really absurd and understated. So I guess one of my favorite comedic actors is John Cleese. Yeah.
No good. Out of like movies you've seen, is there any that kind of taps into the stand-up experience the best, like Funny People with Seth Rogen and Adam Sandler, or Punchline with Tom Hanks?
Oh, interesting. I don't even know about Punchline. Is Tom Hanks, does he play a stand-up in it?
Yeah, he
Like,
does.
yeah,
When did
he's
it come out?
yeah, because it's a Sally Field. She's a housewife who's trying comedy, and she has a family. But then there's this like wonderkind. Tom Hanks is the stand-up comedian, but he's going to medical school, and I guess more and more in his life, he has to decide which he would rather do, because obviously his family wants him to be more of a doctor, but then he enjoys doing stand-up more, and then he's also coaching Sally Field in how to be funnier, and there's a little kind of romance in there, but it
Oh, I have a
doesn't
question.
really.
Was that because they also obviously worked together in Forrest Gump? Was
Yeah,
that before or after Forrest Gump?
It was
that
before. It
was
was like the late
way,
80s.
yeah, way
Oh,
before.
interesting. Okay, so to answer your question, well, the series Crashing on HBO.
Yeah, I heard of Crashing.
So I watched it with my mom, like when it came out, and I remember like, obviously, okay, first of all, it's like Pete Holmes, who I think his personality can be a lot, but his personality drives the show. So it's not like, so there's parts of his depiction of being a stand-up that are like just about Pete Holmes, you know what I mean? But also, to be honest, it does, some things in the show really do show, like for example, they kind of like they show him auditioning for The Cellar and not getting it initially, and the competition is played by Jabuki Young White, so it's like framed as like the younger, like kind of more relevant, young up and coming comic gets this thing that this like older, more experienced comic wants. Like they show that stuff. They show like how he has to kind of run around to spots. They show how a lot of spots, a lot of shows on any given night are just fine. They're not great. They're not bad. They're just like, you did your jokes. The audience was pretty into it. That's like so much of the week, honestly. And they also even show like when they go into Brooklyn, they like set up a scene where it's like, and now you're doing like the like Brooklyn comedy, and it's like Joe Firestone plays, isn't it? And there's like a harp on stage, which is obviously exaggerated, but I like how they show aspects of running around in New York as a stand-up. For me, that's the most accurate depiction or the most relatable depiction. When people say, "Oh, Marvelous Miss Maisel," when like people are like, "Oh, that's like, oh wow, is that what your life is like?" Like, no, first of all, the way that's you don't just like, I mean, obviously it's like a stylized period comedy, right? But like the idea of kind of like I've only really seen the first season or two, but the idea of like starting out and just like killing on like loose material, and then the next time kind of like doing different material, that's so not accurate. And but that show is the kind of show where then like your friend's mom is like, "Oh, I thought of you. I watched Marvelous Miss Maisel." But to be frank, I think more accurately, I think Crashing is a fun picture of it. Yeah. What if I was like the Joker? Yeah, that's how I feel. I guess I gotta watch Punchline.
I think it's on Tubi if you want to find it.
TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Check it out.
And it's set in New York.
Yeah, it's in Manhattan.
It is, or is it Chicago?
I think it's Manhattan because doesn't he go to Columbia University or something like that?
Oh, okay.
I just thought it was general medical school. Sorry,
It's been a
about
while
this,
since I've
having
seen it,
argued.
so yeah.
I'm curious.
Same here.
That's interesting. Okay, I gotta find. What's the other one you mentioned?
Funny People.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I haven't actually seen Funny People. I'm also like bad at watching comedy. I mean, I watch like I have like my little things that I like or like series that I like, but I feel like the bigger what do you call it? The marker or like the big I don't know, like comedy films that are in the canon, I guess. Like I haven't seen just by I don't know, not on principle, just out of my
Don't
own.
have time.
Yeah, I don't have time. Grew up in Asia, whatever. I don't know what so so I have a lot to catch up to. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, feel free to hit any of us up. We'll give you suggestions of our favorites.
Cool. That sounds great. Yeah, that's how I feel.
So I just have one last question for you, Brittany. What advice would you give to aspiring comedians who want to break into the industry?
Whoa, okay. So I have a few thoughts about this that are now complicated by this whole social media topic. And this comes from like I recently was having a conversation with a woman who's like a few years in or like 2 years in. And she was like, oh yeah, don't you hate it when you post the reel at this hour and then nobody watches it? And it just blew my mind and it made me like bummed out because I was like, that's so anti everything that I feel about what's important when you start comedy. Like you shouldn't be focused on whether something gets likes online, but that also is just the moment we're living in, and it's so different. Like I started in 2014. Obviously, that was a different time in relationship to social media, right? And growing as a comedian. So I feel like now what happens is a lot of people that are just starting out also see social media as inherently part of it, and they'll develop a presence online or try to, but they don't know how to carry an hour. They don't really know what to do if you bomb. They don't know how to like do a tight 20 minutes yet. It's just that they have a video online that gets a lot of likes, and then they get booked for an opportunity that they're not quite ready for because they haven't gone through the practice of being on stage. So my big advice, that aside, that's a more negative feeling, but I got to say it's true. I just had this response recently. I think, and this is from my own experience and from my own failure, you got to just go on stage. Actually, I taught a quick stand-up class at Tiny Cupboard, which was in Bushwick, like a few months ago, or maybe in the late fall. Never mind, not a few months, late fall. But my big thing was like, you gotta just you have to perform. You can't practice your jokes in your room. You can help memorize them, help yourself memorize them. But the way to learn about how you operate on stage and whether your jokes work are to do it in front of people at an open mic. There's no like cheat code. So I think I get frustrated by social media because it's like a cheat code. It's like you don't have to like expand your bases if you have one video that works well. I think you need to go up in front of audiences. I think you need to go up in front of different kinds of audiences. You should do like hipster rooms if that's what you have access to, and you should go into Manhattan, and you should go into like, or like if they're in your city, like I like brew, like there's like a difference between a show that happens in like a sports bar versus like an art space versus a dive bar versus a comedy club. And I think that trying your hand at all of those spaces is really important for figuring out how to then sell yourself well as a comedian, and helps you ultimately when you go on the road. So and then yeah, and my last big thought about my last big thought is like repetition, really hammer out those jokes, and you'll learn what doesn't work because the audience will tell you. And then more broadly about the industry, I've learned this the hard way. It's really key if you want to go into writing to have a writing sample, like a pilot, even if it's not particularly good, or if it's like just not something like you want to make necessarily, but it's like a like here's a script, here's what a script that I write looks like. That's so important. People are looking for that in terms of getting staffed as a writer.
Yeah, that definitely helps me out. I want to be eventually a screenwriter of some
Yeah, cool.
sort.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I
thank
think,
you.
yeah, of course. And I'm seriously, I learned that because I've been like, what's the expression? You're like slapped on the wrist. You know what I mean? Like when I didn't, yeah, like I've been like people wanting to see work from me, but I didn't have it in time. So having a writing sample is so key.
Okay. And I guess for my last question, this might be a little more insidery, but
Sure.
when is Kingdom Phylum Ask going to finally come out as a
Oh,
special?
oh, great question. Okay, so that's actually, well, because this other special that came out with, obviously it was like a half hour of basically miscellaneous jokes. That was like very intentional so that I could save a lot of material for Kingdom Phylum Ask. I think that I wanted to spend another, like, that was a big project, the little special. So now that it's finished and now that it's out, and now I have time to start like hammering out Kingdom Phylum Ask. And what that means for me, like tangibly in New York, is like picking it up at a smaller theater, like I did it before, so a Playhouse a bunch, like acoustically without tech, and then like doing it more in a hall or caveat. And therefore, I want to like spend 6 months like really honing it and traveling with it. So probably a special of it wouldn't be out for like another year, the earliest, but the goal is to like make it really good before I do that. And potentially I could film it at the end of the year. But first I have a lot of live work to do on it. So that's my next, but that's my goal. I'm really glad you asked. That's my goal, to have an hour of Kingdom Phylum Ask. Yeah.
Okay.
On, the dream would be if it got picked up by a streamer, but if it was something that was really well produced and on YouTube, that would be awesome too. But I gotta like make it good first.
I'm sure it'll be excellent.
Thank you. And thank you for all of your support coming to those.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Like I got, yeah, like I'm going to be doing in LA in June. So I'm going to start this process again.
Oh, okay. And Andre, do you have any last questions or words before we wrap it up?
Yeah, where can people find you and see your stand-up?
Totally. So I post about my shows generally daily that I on my Instagram, Brittany.goblin.carney. I have a TikTok, but I'm not as active on it, honestly. So Instagram is a great way to find me and find out what I'm doing. I have a Squarespace. BrittanyCarneyComedy.com, and I have like a KOMI is like the other platform. I have one. So I have like different ways to find general updates or larger shows. On Instagram, I post about shows week to week and also, of course, promote my larger shows. Something that's consistent is that every third Sunday of the month, I co-host a show called Good God, and that's the Instagram name, Good God, at Union Hall. And I'm going to be hosting a show called a like older variety show called Showgasm. I'm just hosting the next installment on May 30th. May 30th, that's at Ars Nova. And all of this stuff I post about on my Instagram. So thank you. Go there, please.
Okay. Well, we thank you for being our guest this episode. If you ever want to come back, please feel free. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to think and talk about comedy.
Next time, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about movies, or we can keep talking about comedy. Either or, just please come back.
That would be awesome. No, we should talk about movies. That sounds really fun. I love
okay.
Yeah, it was an honor to have you on. This was really fantastic. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Oh yeah, thanks for your guys' time. I appreciate it, and thanks for accommodating my schedule.
No problem. I'm just gonna do the outro right now. So this is where I'm reading. So if I'm not looking at the camera, don't mind me. Miss Carney, we believe you to be legendary. Right now, you're just building and laying the groundwork with experiences because you truly are one of a kind. And thank you for being a guest and agreeing to be here. Feel free. Oh, yeah, I just said that. The rest of it. So, but just wanted to tell you that we truly do appreciate you and your work, and we are honored that you came on our little show.
And more people need to find you.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much. That means. Wait, did you ask me? Wait, what did you say? Did you say where can people find you?
No, I said more people need to find you.
I'm like in the canal. Yeah. I thank you. That really means so much to me. I really appreciate your support. Thank you. It makes me feel energized to keep pushing.
Yes. Please just keep continuing being you, doing your work, and the audience will eventually find you more and more as your work spreads, because trust me, I will keep helping to spread a word about you and your shows.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I trust that the audience will build, so it's going to be a lot of work this year, but hopefully a good one. Yeah,
that is awesome. So that ends our business for this episode. But we always have unfinished business that needs to be attended to, but that is it for this week, guys. Thank you for watching. Please go out and watch Brittany Carney, support her stand-up comedy, watch her clips, share them. Trust me, you won't be sorry. You will love it.
Thank you. Gracias. That's really important to me.
If you like this review, please be sure to like and hit subscribe to be alerted to new episodes in the future.